Hey, yo, lesson here, baby.
watched on demand. Welcome, join live. So there's a group in Dartford at Sports School. Welcome in Pattaya, and quite a few watching on their own, and quite a few will be watching later on demand. And here's Cindy.
Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. Doesn't seem that long, yeah? Summer went really fast. But still summer though, so we shouldn't complain. Those of you who are new, I'm Sandy Thompson, and I work with a group of people called LEAD, Centre for Not-for-Profit Governance and Leadership. I have the best job in the whole wide world. I get to spend my days working with community leaders, supporting them to be the best they can be, and working with community organisations, helping them to be the most effective that they can be. So I spend half my time in Auckland as a Jaffa and the other half of my time up here in Whangarei where I grew up. So I spend a lot of time going over the Brenduins backwards and forwards. But fortunately I have discovered the joy of audiobooks, so I'm becoming quite learned in my journeys between the two. Tonight's topic is legal obligations of boards. We have a bit of a plan. We're going to just check in on the concept of incorporation, which is one of the legal frameworks that most of you are working under. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking at your obligations as a group of people working in the community under that law, and also once you get together and start doing things, what you're obliged to do in terms of the law and society. And then we're going to look at some specific laws that impact on you as board members. So, just to start up there, a bit of a disclaimer is that I am not a lawyer, yeah, and I'm not giving you legal advice. In fact, my biggest source of legal knowledge is the Community Law Manual, which you can all access online. So a lot of what I know about the laws has just come from working with not-for-profits and doing research and talking to lawyers when groups have issues and working through that. So if you have something specific legal that you're working with, please talk to a lawyer, yeah? I'm just a bush lawyer. Okay, so just to get us all warmed up and started, I want you to introduce yourselves to each other because some of you are new to our group here, and also do a bit of a brainstorm. What laws do you know of that apply to all boards? Let's see if we can make a bit of a list. What laws do you know of apply to all, specifically to boards, yeah? I mean, all laws apply to us as human beings, but specifically in the area of governance, which laws do we have to pay attention to? So just at your tables for a couple of minutes. And say hello, reunite. Goodbye.
and an
Okay, team. Let's just gather up some of the laws that we know that apply to all boards. Anyone got any suggestions? Health and safety. Sorry, holidays. So far we've got health and safety, employment laws, parental leave, holidays. Any other table? Minimum wage. Wage protection. Privacy Act, yep. That's part of the laws, yep. So conflict of interest does come into some laws. Human rights. Trustees Act. We've got Trustees Act, we've got Human Rights, we've got Conflict of Interest, Minimum Wage, Privacy. Any others that anyone knows of? Health and Disability, yep.
Is it equal opportunity law?
Sometimes, yep. Okay, if you think of any others as we go, let me know and we'll write them up and we'll try to cover as many as we can today, yeah? Otherwise, I've got some basic ones, like the key ones that I thought we could discuss, and then we can look at some of these other slightly outlier ones as well. First area we have to think about is in terms of our legal identity as an organisation. And we have two types of organisations that are protected or directed by two different laws. So first of all, we have our Incorporated Societies Act. So an incorporated society is when a group of at least 15 people get together and decide to set up an organisation. And once they decide to set up that organisation, they no longer act as individuals, they are representatives of or members of this organisation. That organisation is usually run by a board or a committee or a team, management team, a group of people who take responsibility to lead and be accountable for the organisation. So that does get called a lot of different names in our communities. So quite often our smaller grassroots organisations will call that group of people the committee. Sometimes the bigger organisations call them the board of governors, but it is the same thing. So if you are a committee member, it's the same as being a board member. The same laws apply to you, the same obligations apply to you. It's just that we call your board, the people responsible for your organisation, a committee instead.
We have a question from Kaihara.
Yep.
So we have people who are part of family trusts.
Yep.
And they're wondering if some of this is applicable.
Most of these laws will apply to family trusts if that family trust employs staff. Yeah, Family Trust Act has slightly different laws to the Trustees Act, Charitable Trust Act. Yeah, so family trusts are usually set up to manage an asset. Charitable trusts are usually set up to manage an asset and also to create a different legal entity to the community that you're, or the individual serving the community. Yeah, so family trusts are a little bit different. Charitable trusts, there will be a group of people who want to do something, a change in the world, and they will set up a charitable trust, and they are like the settlers of a trust. But usually in those organisations, the original trustees will have some way of themselves being replaced by other trustees. So those of you who've done this workshops before, we've talked about this, yeah? That in an incorporated society, you're more like representative of the many, of the community. And usually we have AGMs, and our committees or our board members get appointed by our AGM members, by the members of our association. Charitable trusts don't have to have AGMs. Within the trust deed, it talks about how our trustees are replaced. Some trusts will still have AGMs because they feel strongly about being accountable to their community. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have these things called charitable trusts and these things called incorporated societies, which themselves become legal entities separate from the individuals running them.
I have a question. Right now, it's quite a lot of social enterprises.
Yep.
A lot like that in New Zealand or no? And for those people, which law they should apply?
Okay.
The Company Act or?
In New Zealand, we don't have a legal structure for social enterprises. So most of social enterprises will set themselves up as companies, but they will call themselves not-for-profit companies, and they will have a company incorporate trust deed or constitution that will describe about how as a company that they are there for charitable purposes, not for profit generating. Yeah, but some social enterprises also set themselves up as a charitable trust. So you can choose between the two. Yeah. And I think that there is going to be some consultation in New Zealand about getting our own legal structure for social enterprises. Everyone knows about social enterprises, yeah? Businesses that are set up to generate income to support communities. So they're set up as not-for-profits, but they engage in business activities as opposed to social service provision or community development activities. But they don't make a profit, and usually the monies they generate go back into communities. So when we incorporate, which means we either become an incorporated society or we become a trust, we become a distinct legal entity separate from our members, separate from our board and our employees. It means that the entity, the trust or the society, continues even when the people in it change. So it's a standalone entity. It's allowed to accumulate assets, so it can accumulate some wealth. It's just not allowed to distribute that wealth amongst its members. It has to stay within the organisation. And there are personal liabilities are limited for the individuals. So if you're a board member or a committee member, there are laws that protect you around your personal liability. and there are some minimum requirements that you have to meet under the law, just to give some certainty that you're operating as a legal entity. So you do have some liabilities, and I think we've looked at this at another session we did, that if you're on a board or a committee, you are protected personally. So you can't be sued or taken to court for any activities of the organisation, except if you act outside of your objects and purposes. So say, for example, you're an organisation, you were set up to promote youth activities in the community, and you started running elderly daycare, and something happened within the elderly daycare, you're operating outside of your constitution, so you're individually liable if something goes wrong. So knowing your constitution is really important. If you are a board member or a committee member, really understand what the objects set out that you are doing. If you commit an illegal act, you no longer have protection of the Incorporated Societies or Trustees Act. So if you decide to fundraise by creating marijuana-laced sleep pillows, you've totally lost your incorporated protection, and as individuals you'll be prosecuted. If you act for pecuniary gain, that means as a board member, if you act in a way to bring yourself money, you will lose the protection of being a legal entity. So you cannot participate or materially influence decisions. So say you were going to be paid to do a piece of work for your organisation, you're allowed to be. Just because you're a board member doesn't exclude you from being paid. But if you're at the meeting and you say, this is how much I'm going to get paid and this is how you're going to pay me, then actually you've broken the law. Yeah, you have to remove yourself from that conversation. Not only if it's about you, but your relatives as well. So you cannot contribute to a conversation about your relatives being paid. And if you do get paid for doing something for your organisation, it has to be reasonable and related to market value. So if you become the coordinator for a year, you can't pay yourselves $360,000 for that job, because the court would say that's way above what anyone else in the sector has been paid. Probably $340,000 a year more than anybody else in the sector. And again, you can't make decisions for related persons. Any questions about that? So basically, if you know your objects and your rules and you stay within them and you act within the law and all other aspects around fundraising and employment, and you also don't try to make money out of the organisation personally, you're protected by the law as being a board member on societies and trusts.
Reasonable market value.
Yeah.
So also if you offer mates rates type thing, you know, because it doesn't, so you're under market value.
No one cares about under market value.
But you're taking it away from somebody else. Like,
Yeah. No, the only time that people care about that was back in the day, before we had a Charities Commission. The reason why we have a Charities Commission is because Sanitarium, because it was a charitable organisation, was able to undercut a lot of other cereal producers because they weren't paying tax, and that was seen as unfair to the capitalistic market. But otherwise, no. Yeah. If you're paying under market rates, you're not ripping people off, you're actually donating. If it was a government department and you were undercutting, then there might be something around unfair market practice, but in our sector, no. Yeah. But you know what, if we're on committees and boards and someone's offering to do something as mates rates, sometimes mates rates isn't always the best, yeah? Because if it's your mate and things aren't going well, it's really hard to come back and say, we didn't like the quality of what you did. Or the person, because they're doing it really cheap, might be delaying it by 6 weeks, and it's really hard to push them along because you know you're getting a cheap rate. So before you accept mates rates deals, have a think about whether in the long term it's worth it, yeah?
You have a question. My organisation, the committees get paid hourly when we attend the meeting, or when we do things for the association.
Yep.
But that payment was discussed among the committee itself too. Is that the participated in or actually influence
Okay.
the decisions?
So the question is about board members getting paid to attend meetings and getting paid to do work. Yeah, two different things.
Yeah.
If board members are being paid to come to a meeting and it's called a wage or a salary, then you're possibly a bit grey there. But if you were to call it a meeting fee or an honorarium, then you're allowed to set that yourself. Yeah. If you are being paid to do some work for the organisation, then you cannot contribute to the conversation about how much you are being paid. You could, as a board, set a policy to say any board members who work for this organisation will only earn minimum wage. That's the policy. So you can have that, but you can't go into negotiation at a board level about how much you're going to be paid when you're the one being paid. Because you can't be your own employer. Then that's a different structure, yeah?
But it was discussed about the hourly rate. Just discuss the hourly rate, doesn't discuss specify that how much money will get paid, but they discuss the hourly rate depending on how many hours you commit to the association and how many hours you commit.
If it's about your job and you, then you're possibly crossing the line.
Okay.
But if you have a conversation about all board members will only get paid this much, then that's probably a little bit more acceptable. But the minute you start talking about your job and what you are going to be paid, you cannot materially influence the decision. Yeah. So in that circumstance, best to be minuted that you gave your opinion, you gave your thoughts, and then you left the room or you abstained from a vote. Yeah. The law really only kind of cares when people lose money. Yeah. Most of the laws around what we do in organisations is about protecting public money and protecting people's assets. Everyone okay with that? All right, so as long as you stick to your constitution and don't commit to an illegal act, don't make money out of the organisation unduly, then you'll be fine. You'll be protected. If something goes wrong, the organisation will be liable, not you as an individual. No one's going to come and take your house away. Yeah, no one's going to put you in jail, except if these things happen. Right, so you have some duties and liabilities as an officer. So in the law, they call board members or committee members officers. That's the legal term that they use. So you have to act in good faith and best interests of the organisation. So when you're in your meetings and you're having conversations about spending money or what you're going to do, you have to think what is good for this organisation and community, not what's good for Sandy. Yeah, so sometimes on boards we're asked to make decisions that will actually impact on us individually. The law tells us we have to step outside of that and move beyond that and act in the interests of the organisation. Sometimes where that gets tricky is those of you who are on regional or national organisations, yeah? So you come together and you represent your local group. When you're on that national or that regional group, you have to represent the interests of the national or the regional group, not your local group. Which means sometimes you'll be making decisions that don't benefit your local group, but benefits the collective. Yeah, so we have to keep that in mind as well. You have to exercise your powers for proper purposes. That's related to what's in the objects of your constitution. And you have to act according to them. You cannot cause or allow substantial risk to organisation creditors. And what this looks like in some of our organisations is when we accept grants for partial funding for projects and we don't have the money for the rest of the project, we're potentially acting illegally, yeah? If we take money to do something we know we don't have the capacity to deliver, then we are potentially breaching the law. So that's about incurring obligations unless reasonable grounds to perform. So that's like if I was in a business and I was making chairs and it was a small business, just me, and I made one chair a week, and I got an order from a company and said, you know, here's $500,000, could you make us 83 chairs this week? And I took the money, knowing it's physically impossible for me to make those many chairs. That's actually a little bit illegal, yeah? And in our organisations when we take on obligations. And we have to exercise reasonable care and not make unauthorised pecuniary gain or use of information. So if you learn something as being part of a board member or committee member, you can't go somewhere else and use that information for your own benefit. Yeah? So if you're on a board that's talking about making a playground or something like a playground, and somebody else you know owns the house next door and it's going to decrease the value of their house, you can't run in there and tell people quickly sell your house, there's a playground coming, you know, so you can't use that information. Make sense? Cool. And lastly, you have what's called a duty of care. So this is your moral and legal obligation to ensure the safety of well-being for others. So you have to behave as a reasonable person would behave under the circumstances. And where duty of care for me really comes to the fore is when we have volunteers and young people in our programs, that we have to make sure that we are taking good care of them. We can't just say that's not our responsibility. So if we run a program for children and someone's mum or dad hasn't picked them up, we can't walk away and leave them there because it's not our fault their parents have come. That's not good duty of care. If we have volunteers and we give them jobs to do that we know are beyond their physical capability, and we're setting them up to put them in danger, then we're not exercising our duty of care to look after people. Any questions about this? Okay. So how we carry out our duty of care is through watchfulness, attention, caution, and prudence. So what I'd like you to do at your tables is think of some situations in your organisation where you put those into place. Where are you watchful? Where do you pay attention? Where are you cautious? And where are you prudent? So where do you carry out your duty of care in your moral sense or legal sense? Just a quick conversation at your tables. Are you good at duty of care? Or do you all go home when the whistle blows? Okay, team. Does anybody have any examples for us in their organisation of being watchful, attentive, cautious and prudent? Who's got an example? Yes.
Well, I was talking about particularly around children's sports, for gymnastics.
Yep.
You know, you've always got to make sure, particularly the health and safety
Yes.
side of things with the apparatus.
Yeah.
It's even down to making sure that kids don't wear good earrings,
Yeah.
the proper clothing, so the coaches don't bruise them when you
Yeah.
catch them and all that.
So duty of care to keep the kids safe, right? And look after their well-being. Who else has an example?
I think from the organisation that I'm sort of working with is around when you're working with vulnerable people,
Yep.
being aware of what's going on around them and potential for being taken advantage of.
Yes.
But as a board also, looking after the wellbeing of the staff,
Yep.
particularly if they are working in a situation, you know, their normal working process has, you know, the potential to be stressful.
Yep.
And making sure your staff
Yeah.
is safe.
So duty of care to clients, duty of care to our staff. So employment law sometimes stops at a certain point, but some people in our community are working in very stressful environments with very difficult contexts. So we have, I'm just thinking the volunteer work I do around commercial sexual exploitation of children, we have folk working for us that get to view exploitation material. And that's not a pleasant thing for people to do in their line of work as volunteers or staff. So we have to put things in place for them. I'm thinking rape crisis, counsellors, putting supervision in place for people. Those things aren't in the law, but our duty of care to our people is to look after their total well-being. Yeah? Any other examples of duty of care? That's about people. Is there any other dimension?
With our youth, we put in place RAMs.
Yep.
RAMs produced before they do an evening.
Yep. So it's risk assessment, monitoring, yeah? So that's about being cautious and prudent with people's safety. And watchful. Yeah.
I think, you know, we're a regional organisation, so we have smaller things. So watching, making sure that they are healthy, running effective organisations.
Yeah. So it's not just about duty of care around the people dimension, it's around the assets and the organisation dimension as well. So where we are attentive and watchful is through reporting, yeah? So paying attention to reports means that we're carrying out our duty of care. And listening to what people are telling us about what's going on in our organisation and watching out means that we're doing our duty of care. So during Enron, when all the directors were being prosecuted for what happened over there around the loss of jobs and the loss of people's money, the directors all said, but we were lied to, we didn't know. And the legal response to that was, people of your calibre and your knowledge should have paid better attention. So they were all culpable for what happened. So saying, you know, I wasn't told or I forgot to read the reports is not exercising your duty of care. For most part, the boards I work with, people are good at this, because people who step up to boards do that because they have a sense of responsibility and that they know that this is what they have tasked to do as leaders. So I consider all of you leaders that have stepped up to lead in your communities and to put this into place on behalf of your communities. So we all cup high with that. We've got this general responsibilities and accountabilities we have as board members and committee members. But what happens in a lot of our organisations is we start to employ people to do the work. So the jobs that we're doing become too much for a small committee or a board to do, so we start to pay people to do the work on behalf of us. I have to say that most organisations in New Zealand do not hire staff. It's something like 93% or something have 100% volunteers in their organisations. But when I work with organisations who aren't doing so well, one of the areas that they're not doing so great is that board members don't really understand employment law. And that's a tension for us as board members when we're volunteers. Now all of a sudden we're employers. We have all these responsibilities. But ignorance of the law is no excuse for not treating our staff well. So here's a quick quiz for you all to see how well you all know employment law.
I don't mind it by myself.
Employment law quiz. One more? One more?
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
I missed what you just said. I think you
Okay, team, we all done? All right, we'll quickly run through the answers. Minimum number of untaken sick days that you can accrue to go on that Bahamas cruise that you want. How many days can we accrue?
No legal.
20. 20. Yeah, we can save up 20 days sick leave and take them if we need to. Yeah. Which means also don't forget sick leave you can take when you have to care for other family members as well. Yeah.
For 1 year or sick leave?
No, over time. You can have 20 hours sitting there. And you know, I've heard of workplaces, like large workplaces, where someone in the workplace has gotten really sick, and people have gifted their sick days to that person. Yeah. And that depends on what your employment contract looks like and what the policies of the organisation are. So in this instance, she had breast cancer and she was really sick, so all her colleagues donated their sick leave to her.
How long should you work for? If she was just working 1 month or 2 months, then she sick.
Well, no, because your sick leave accumulates. So you only get so many hours per month, or how many hours, days per year. You can save them up. Yeah. You don't get 20 days instantly stepping into the job. No. Okay.
But old contracts, they can just keep building up.
Yeah, you can build up more. If your contract says you can build up more, you can. Don't forget, employment law is the minimum you have to give people. The minimum by law. Your employment agreement can give people lots more if you can afford it or you want to. And a lot of organisations I know give people a lot more holidays than actually the law entitles them to have. Yeah, because sometimes giving holidays is one way that we can compensate for lower salary rates and a few other things.
Can I just ask about pro rata on sick leave?
Yeah. So again, I'm not an employment lawyer, but my understanding is if I work 0.5, say like half a week, and I get, I don't know, 10 sick days a year, then it's the equivalent of 10 half days. Yeah? Does that make sense? Everything, when you work part-time, everything is divided by the amount of hours that you have. So the law says 20 days, but then if you've only been working 0.5, then it's actually the equivalent of 10 days.
I had a conversation with somebody recently that disagreed with that.
Yeah.
That was my understanding.
Yeah. But you might want to double check. Guys, this was taken from Business New Zealand, this quiz. They have really good resources, and they also have people you can talk to. And they have all sorts of tools and things. You can build employment contracts and you just fill in the slots. You don't have to pay for expensive employment lawyers. You can go check them out first and then just use your lawyers for the tricky stuff. So, the government provides a lot of resource around employment law and people's employment rights. Okay, so if someone doesn't show up for work, how long before you can fire them for not showing up for work? The time specified in their employment agreement. Yeah. So what does that tell us, team? Make sure we have it in the employment agreement, yeah? If it's not in the employment agreement, you can't fire them for not showing up. Yeah. And for most of us, this is not an issue, but for some of us it is. Especially, yeah. Does an employee have to keep copies of education or other qualifications in your file? Nah, you don't have to keep that stuff, huh? Can you change a job description on a person? No. Yeah, so the job description's part of your employment agreement with the person. When they sign the employment agreement, that's what that job that they were signing up to do. So you have to consult. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to change their job description, but you have to do it under consultation. You also can't change someone's employment agreement to get rid of them. Yeah, there's a whole process around. If you change more than a substantial amount of someone's job, there has to be certain processes you go through with that. Otherwise, it's called managing somebody out. Managing somebody out is an illegal act. And I have to say, a lot of the organisations I work with, they end up in employment court is because they've managed somebody out because they don't want to employ them anymore. So they just make, in essence, what it means is we make their life hell so they leave. And then people take out personal grievances and say, you put all these things in place so I couldn't succeed, you changed my job description, you didn't give me feedback, you wouldn't let other members of the staff talk to me, you excluded me from staff meetings. What you were trying to do was get me to leave, and that's illegal to do that. Yeah. Does an employer have to show an employee all the file notes on their performance? Yes. You keep notes on somebody's performance and how they're doing in their job, they have a right to see what you're saying. Privacy Act is about collection of information from someone about their personal details, so probably I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, you have the right to see if information kept on you, yeah. So if somebody complains about a staff person, they have a right to see that complaint if you've put it in a file, yeah? So this is about fairness to our staff, yeah? Can you make an employee take annual leave for jury service? No. Jury service, you're obliged by law to let people go. If people are essential in the workplace and can't leave, then they can get off jury service. So you can write a letter saying that we can't do what we have to do without this person. Yeah. Yeah, Whangarei, because, yeah. I'm pretty sure that the Department of Justice gives them an allowance. Yeah, you get an allowance for attending, but you don't have to be out of pocket for paying them, I think. I'm not sure how it works, to tell the truth. Yeah. Yeah. But do employers have to pay the person if they're on jury duty? No. No. So when you get called up for jury duty, lose a day's work, you just get an allowance, but you're doing your civic duty for doing it. And I'm pretty sure that the fact is that your family would be in abject poverty if you lost a day's wages might be a good reason for not having to go to jury. But you would have to demonstrate that. Yeah.
I was lucky then. My previous employer, when I attended jury service, they still pay me 40 hours for that
Yeah.
week, and I was 2.5 days out of job.
Yeah.
They still pay me my normal wages, and I also got the other money from the call to attend the jury service allowance. And I talked to my team leader, say, I need to pay the money back to the company. They say they don't.
Okay.
So I keep both money.
So you got both double dip, yeah? So don't get that there's the law and then there's wanting to be a good employer. So the law says, you know, you don't have to pay your person for doing whatever, but actually 1 day, 2 days, you want to get a little bit extra out of that person and a bit of goodwill. Is it really going to cost your organisation that much? These are the things you have to think about, yeah? That just because it's the law doesn't mean you have to, that's the only thing. You can give above what the law says. How soon do you have to respond to an employee's request for flexible working? 1 month. Yeah. I had to say personally I was surprised with that one, eh? Because
sometimes you've got to check with the rest of the team.
yeah. Yeah.
I was surprised there was any time.
I know. But I guess large employers that have to consult and go through processes to find out if a person can, say, work from home or change their hours. Yeah. Because in my mind, flexible working is about, I need to work from home because something's happened with one of the kids. You don't really have a month to, but that's, But legally, 1 month. You got to get back to the person. How long do you have to work before you're entitled to holiday pay, holiday leave? 12 months. Yeah, harsh, eh? It's like you got to work for 12 months before you're allowed to go on holiday. Most employers that I work with actually don't stick to that. After 6 months, they let people take leave if they need it. It's, yeah. Again, it's kind of like, what kind of culture do you want to create in your organisation?
It's also annual leave as a liability
on your balance sheet.
On the balance sheet.
Yeah.
So therefore, if an employee is taking it, then you haven't got that liability.
That's right. Yeah. And some places shut down for the summer. So people can't take leave during the year. They have to take their leave during summer shutdown, yeah? What's the minimum wage, team? $17.70. That doesn't mean that you can't pay more, but that's the least you can pay. So sometimes this is where I work with a lot of not-for-profits. They pay volunteer stipends or volunteer allowances, or they create these jobs and give people a fee for doing it. You add up how many hours the person actually did to do that work, and they're being paid less than the minimum wage. So you have to be careful when you're stepping outside of standard employment that you're not actually abusing someone's employment rights, yeah? Especially when it comes to volunteers, because volunteers don't get paid, yeah? So you can't be paying them less than minimum wage and call it a stipend or something. It's actually an abuse. Okay, which of the following must you do when hiring? Provide KiwiSaver information to the employee in Inland Revenue, deduct contributions, yep. Automatically enroll in an employee scheme, yep. All of the above, right? Okay. So this website is where you get all of this information. Like I said, they have templates, they have people that can answer questions. It must be a... Also, don't forget there's a difference between minimum wage and livable wage. Yeah? Quite a bit of difference. I think the livable wage is something like $22.50 or $22.70. Yeah. So a lot of organisations I work have a moral conversation about what they pay their staff. Yeah, especially organisations who are working in communities to deal with issues of poverty and injustice. They're like, we're not going to contribute that by paying minimum wage, we're going to pay livable wages. Yeah, lots for us to think about. Can I say that most of the employment issues when I'm working with organisations is around employment relations. So most of our organisations are pretty good when it comes to the law, but when it comes to how they relate with their employees and the different processes they use, that's sometimes when we come unstuck as boards. And first of all, like I said, the amount of managing out I see always surprises me, that we don't realise that that's illegal. And also people come to me and say, oh, the staff person, da-da-da. And I always say, you've got to go back to the employment agreement. So by law, in the employment agreement, you must outline what to do if the relationship breaks down, and you must follow it. You cannot step outside of it. So that's why having your employment agreements checked and looked at by someone who knows what the ins and outs are is really important. And once you've done it once, you can use the same template. Yeah. And again, government does have some examples, but they're the minimum. We're okay with employment law? You're all going to be good employers? Yeah. Some people think that that because they're not-for-profit community organisations, none of this applies. It absolutely 100% applies. And as board members, we need to know the law because we need to be fair and ethical with our staff, yeah? So the biggest one that board members are concerned about and always talk about is health and safety in the workplace. And it's this big scary thing that everyone's just like, I'm not going on a board because I'm going to be liable for the health and safety of what goes on in this organisation. But actually it's not this big awful scary thing. So what changed the law for us all was Pike River. So we're talking about a mine here, not a small community getting together to carry out some social change action or put on something for community. But what was learnt and why the law was changed was that the board needs to satisfy itself that managers are ensuring workers are being protected. So the boards can no longer say to your manager or your staff, you make sure that all health and safety is taken care of. As directors on a board or members of a board, it's now your responsibility to make sure it's happening. Okay, so you're not responsible for doing your risk assessment plans and all of those things. You are responsible for making sure that they are happening. That a board would have ensured that these things had done properly, yeah? So that boards will ask questions about what's going on with health and safety. So the board of Pike River wasn't doing these things. That the board focused on meeting production targets set the tone for the management. So they put a lot of pressure on the team to actually produce rather than talking about how things got produced. And we could see something similar happen in our community groups with our managers, yeah? You know, how many programs have you delivered? How many volunteers have you gotten through? How many of this have you done? And counting things rather than saying, when we did all these things, were we keeping everybody safe? What was the quality of what we were doing? And that the chairman's general attitude was that things were under control unless told otherwise. Like with the Enron team, do not assume that just because you're not being told that everything is fantastic. You have to proactively ask, and that's how the law was changed. So it's not scary for boards. You've kind of always been responsible for what happens in the organisation as part of your duty of care, but now you can't blame the management or blame the staff. You're all in this together. So the law was changed to make sure that boards know that. So here's what the law says that you have to do to keep people safe. So it's a bit of a checklist. So just at your tables, go through each of those and see how well you are doing on your health and safety. Okay, team. Well, now, one of the big changes, or one of the things that became really clear under the law, was that it only applies to people who have employees. So if you have an organisation, you have no paid staff, according to the law, you don't have to worry about the health and safety law as it stands. But you do have a duty of care. Yeah, so it would be good practice for organisations who don't have paid staff to consider that they do have people working for them and to actually put these things in place to keep them safe. And Bart would probably know a lot more about this, about the use of volunteers in our workplace and keeping them safe. So the law is that as a volunteer board member, you can't be prosecuted or held accountable for something that happens with health and safety. But if you're negligent, you can be. Yeah? So even though you're a volunteer on a board and you are negligent, you can still be individually.
Volunteers have to be advised of all health and safety regulations and looked after the same as your ordinary staff.
Yeah. So that's pretty much good practice, right, Bart? Treat your volunteers as staff when it comes to the Health and Safety Act. And then you're fulfilling your duty of care.
Yes? Wanting to know if a board can appoint a member to be sole responsible.
Okay, so it's good practice to have a health and safety champion or a health and safety person. Did everyone hear that question? Can we appoint someone to be responsible? You cannot delegate or hand over your responsibility, but you can appoint someone on your board to be the health and safety person. Yeah, but just because you've created someone to be the health and safety person, they're not 100% responsible. You are still collectively as a board responsible. But it makes sense for us on boards to have one board member keeping their eye on that board, yeah? Making sure that things are happening and coming back to the board with things. So that's just a good practice. But you cannot delegate out your responsibilities and accountabilities under the law.
I guess the other thing the tendency when you look at that sort of list is to look at people's physical safety.
Yeah.
But it's also their mental.
Yeah, it's their mental well-being as well. Yeah, so this is about well-being. So if you have a staff member, once upon a time we used to think it was really great if we had staff members that worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They were the best employees in the world. But actually that's no longer legal, yeah, because we're abusing their well-being. Which means we have to get to know our people, yeah? Because if somebody's got something going on in their life which is causing them extra stress, and they come to work and we're putting some little bit of extra stress on them, we're amplifying what's going on for them. And we're contributing to their lack of mental well-being. So we have to get to know our people. Yes?
So with the health and safety side of things, what say if you need personal protection gear, which is normally as an employer, if you're doing a job voluntary?
My understanding, again, I'm not a lawyer or a health and safety expert, but my understanding would be that the board or the employer has a responsibility to make sure the volunteers are protected physically. And if you're asking a volunteer to do something that requires safety gear, then I would say that you need to provide it for them. Or if they don't have it personally, don't let them do the job. You know, you might be from a small community group that does planting, and you tell everyone, bring your own spades and bring your own chainsaws and bring your own gear, we're going to go clean up this reserve. But you have to make sure that everyone's using proper safety equipment and that the equipment that they bring along is fit for purpose, yeah. That's your duty of care, keep people safe. So you cannot delegate your responsibilities, same as the employment law, yeah? Some people have a structure in their organisation where they'll have the board or the committee, then they have a manager, and they say the manager's responsible for the employment of all the staff. They just have to tell us who they're employing, we just set the budget, we leave it up to them. You are still the employer as the board. Yeah, you can't delegate your employment responsibilities to a senior manager and leave them to it. Okay, so health and safety is not scary, team. On the back is a whole bunch of governance actions that you can do. We won't go through them one by one. But in essence, what it says is you've got to ask questions and you've got to read reports and you've got to know how the work's being carried out in your organisation and that your people are safe and that you're monitoring, and also as a board that you understand your obligations. So there's lots of different people in the community who give workshops and seminars on health and safety. There's online training on health and safety law. Your board really needs to make sure that they understand what their obligations are and also seek advice, yeah? So don't be put off by the health and safety law. As long as you're carrying out your responsibilities and you're acting in the best you can as any reasonable person would, you're actually following the law.
But those laws are good because they look after yourself.
Exactly.
So I'm more safer because of those laws.
That's right. So the law's not put out to make things difficult for us. The law's there to make sure that our people are being taken care of. Okay, so just want to look at a couple more laws that come into effect as board members. Sometimes we have contracts. We either contract people to do work or we contract people instead of like to do projects or to do a specific task or job for us. So that there is this thing called contract law, and quite often not-for-profit organisations I work with go, oh, we'll just get Bob to come in and he'll put all of our accounts onto MYOB and we'll give him, you know, $500 and it's all sweet. And then things turn to custard and the organisation then is having a fight with Bob and Bob's like, yeah, and the next minute the whole community's up in arms. But actually if you had a contract in the first place, that would have solved a lot of that problem down the track. We need to be careful too that when we have contractors working for our organisation, that we're not treating employees like a contractor. Yeah. So if you expect someone to come to work every day at a certain time for a whole day, you give them all of their equipment to do it, you tell them how to do it, they're not allowed to go work for anybody else. They are an employee and they have employment rights. If you contract a person to do a piece of work, they're allowed to do it in their own time, in their own way. They can provide all their own equipment, they decide their own hours, and they can work multiple contracts at one time for other people. They're contractors. And there are checklists on the internet, and MB have them, to make sure that you're not treating an employee like a contractor. So some organisations prefer contracting staff because they say it's simpler and cleaner and they don't have to worry about holiday pay and all that kind of stuff. But we can't use contracting as a way to get out of our employment obligations. Employment law says there's 5 parts to a contract, and the first one is that there's an offer and an acceptance. So if you make an offer of a contract to pay someone $1,000 to do your newsletter, it's not a contract until there is some formal response saying, yes, I accept this contract. So either in written or there was enough people witnessing a verbal agreement, then it becomes a contract. Then you can hold people liable to it. It has what's called a consideration. That means that somebody is doing something in return for something else. So there's a transaction takes place. I do a piece of work for you and I get something in return. That makes it a contract. Yeah? There's a giving and a taking. If it's just an agreement for us to go out and do something together, that's not a contract. It's more like an MOU. So memorandums of understanding are agreements of how we're going to work together. It's not I'm going to give you this in return for that. That's consideration and a contract. Intention is that both people have entered into this contract wanting to enter into a legal binding contract. So if things turn to custard and one person says, I'm taking you to small claims court because you haven't fulfilled my contract, you can't turn around and say, but I didn't realise that this was a legal document. Yeah, so both parties have to go, the intention, this is a legal agreement and arrangement. And the last one is certainty. And what that means in the law is that there's consensus understanding of what you're being contracted to do. Okay? So your contract has to have all of these parts. If it doesn't have all of these parts, you've probably got more of a memorandum of understanding or some kind of other agreement. If you have all of these parts, then you have legal recourse if somebody breaks that contract. And they have legal recourse if you break that contract. But I encourage boards to go into contracts because it keeps things really clean and clear. Quite often when I'm brought into organisations where there's conflict, it's because there's a lack of certainty of what you're actually agreeing to do, and there's lack of consideration of what that payment actually looks like. Make sense? Cool. The other law that we talk a lot about in our sector is the Human Rights Act. And the Human Rights Act simply protects individuals from discrimination. And mostly when this comes into foreplay in our not-for-profit organisations is around employment and access. So that means that when we're employing people, we cannot discriminate against people in terms of their gender, their religion, age, all of those different things. We cannot discriminate. But that doesn't mean you can't specify certain people that you want to employ if it's necessary for your organisation. So say, for example, you're running a safe house for Muslim women who have experienced family violence. You have every right not to hire a white man to come and work in that house. Yeah? You have a right to say we need Muslim women to work in our organisation. Because you're not discriminating against someone because they're a white man. You're not hiring them because they can't do that type of work for Muslim women in that environment. So it's quite different. Yeah. Anyone else got any questions about this law? And access to services, like for example, one time I came up was a holiday program said that a young child with a disability couldn't enrol in the program, and the child's parents said that's against the Human Rights Act. But actually what it was that they didn't have the physical facilities for that child, and that child would have been unsafe, and it would have put the other children at risk if the staff had to one-on-one with that child. So in circumstances like that, that's not discrimination, that's about safety of the child. Yeah. Hanging all right with that one? Okay, so then we have the Privacy Act. And we've got someone who works in a bank, so like banks are big on this, and big corporates are big on this because they hold a lot of private information. And this is in the news quite a bit, yeah? Like the KiwiSaver company that just lost all its clients' information through hacking. That's kind of like legally a bit dodgy because they've actually broken one of the principles of the Privacy Act. It's about keeping information safe. Yeah. So there are 12 principles to the Privacy Act, but in a nutshell, what it says is that when you collect private information about a person, you must use that information for the purpose that you collected it for. You must tell the person why you're collecting that information and what you're going to do with that information. You must give people the opportunity to look at their private information and make alterations and corrections to make sure it's accurate. You cannot give that information to someone else except if it is an issue of public money, which means Inland Revenue, WINS, all those other government departments can come to you and ask you for private information because it's public funds at risk. You have to give it to them. So they have little exemptions to the law. I know someone who Airbnbs her house, and she had WINS come to her to get private details of someone who stayed in her house because WINS were prosecuting that person for fraud, and she had to hand over the information because the Privacy Act. Yeah. So for us in our organisations, when we collect people's names and addresses for membership lists, what it means for us is we have to tell people this is why we're collecting the information. Sometimes in organisations, members will want to find out who else is in the organisation, or you want to, can I contact such and such? You can't give out that information without permission from the person. So what a lot of organisations do is in your membership form or your sign-up form when you're collecting that information, ask people for permission to distribute their details to other members of the association or to whoever asks for it, yeah? You have to get permission first. If it's publicly available information, you don't have to worry about this. So if the person gives their name and address and phone number and birthday in the phone book or on the internet, that's publicly available information. But to keep yourself safe, you need to get permission how you're going to use people's detail.
I see like groups do all the time, which is quite wrong, is send out group emails.
Yeah, CCing.
Everyone's email contact.
Yep. Big no-no, use BCC, yeah? Yeah. Most groups I work with breach the Privacy Act all the time, and no one's too fussed because we're small community organisations and we all know each other. But get permission to share people's information amongst each other, yeah? Different if you're working for a social service provider where you have clients, right? Because we've got to keep our clients' information safe. But if we're a 100% voluntary group that goes and does planting of reserves, we tend to share more personal information amongst each other. So if you get permission, tell people why you need it, who's going to see it, what you're going to use it for, and you don't give it away, then pretty much you're okay in the Privacy Act.
So if you have like a raffle to get new people to come to your group,
yep.
say like a raffle to give away, name and details and email address,
yep.
and then we send in information afterwards.
If you told the whole membership, Sandy Thompson at sandyt@extra.co.nz, phone number 0227, has just won the raffle, you've breached the Privacy Act. Yeah. But you would just put on your raffle, when people buy it, we will be publishing the name of the winner. Yes, if you tell people before they buy the ticket, we want to be able to tell everyone who won. Yeah.
But if you use that information for the raffle ticket to actually say, would like to join our group,
you have to tell people you're doing that. So where we sometimes get dodgy too, team, is we have an event and we collect who's here. Next minute we put them on our fundraising database. Nah. You have to tell people why you're collecting an attendance list. We're collecting this attendance list because we would like to email you some information. So just tell people what you might be likely to do with their name and phone number. Yeah. Yeah. That's why on all those emails, the unsubscribe button, on all our, yeah. If you don't want to be part of this, let us know. Yeah. So it's common sense stuff, just to protect people's privacy.
It is interesting. I had an interesting situation where I had somebody who had, it was an employment thing, claimed a qualification which they subsequently queried. It wasn't a requirement for the job, but it was called.
Yep, the decision, yep.
Decision making. And so I phoned the university and asked. And the woman said, not sure. So I said, well, do you publish your graduates? Like Northland Polytech do.
Yep.
And she said, yeah, we do.
So it's public information.
So it wasn't publicised.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of funny, I'm not 100% au fait, but all sorts of laws about giving job references, but what you can and can't say to job reference, but I'm not up on that really. But I think New Zealand's quite small when it comes to doing job references anyway, because it's quite likely that your second cousin's neighbour is the employer of the previous person. So we all lost, yeah. I've stood behind someone in a shopping supermarket line and they've been discussing someone who I've actually been on an interview panel of, and I'm like, whoa, this is a small place. Yeah. Vulnerable Children's Act. If you have children in your programs and you receive money from Oranga Tamariki or any government department, then all of the people who have, including your board, need to have police background checks. Right? If you're not receiving government money, the law doesn't apply. And if it's a one-off program where you've got a whole bunch of volunteers working with kids, the law doesn't apply. But again, just because it's not law doesn't mean it's good practice. So if you have children and young people in your programs and you've got volunteers working with them, make sure that you have pay staff who have had police checks supervising what's going on. Yes, it's about protecting children and doing whatever you can. Anybody here part of the vulnerable children? Yeah, but just, yeah. So your staff and you guys as board members have all had background checks, yeah. It's easy to do, you know, and it's worth doing. I think it's like $25 or something, yeah.
If you're registered in the charity service, you're exempt.
Are you? Oh, okay. It's a hint, yeah. Hey, last thing, guys, is around tax laws. Some not-for-profits think because we're not-for-profit we don't have to have any tax laws and we don't have to, because we don't pay income tax, we don't pay tax. Not true. You are liable for all of the employment taxes, PAYE, ACC, fringe benefit tax, student, all of those taxes you must pay. You are not exempt from employment tax just because you're a not-for-profit. You must pay your GST. A lot of groups that I work with completely go belly up because they think because they're not for profit, they don't have to pay GST. You do. And make sure that your GST is sitting in a separate place so your board knows that that money is GST money. It does not belong to you. A lot of boards will look at the balance sheet or the income and think, oh, look at all the money we have. 15% of that money belongs to the government and it needs to go to them. And what happens at a certain point, they can't afford to pay their GST or their PAYE because the board hasn't been reading those financial accounts properly. And
it's just something to solve, like due to fundraising.
yep.
There's no GST payable on that.
If you have donee status, you can, no, that's not to do with GST, that's to do with income tax. No, I'm not sure whether some grants are GST exempt.
No, some of them will pay GST
inclusive, yeah. I'm pretty sure that individual donations doesn't accrue GST, but yeah. Like somebody gives you some money, I don't think that has GST on it.
If you're selling tickets for Garden Discovery or something like that?
I'm not sure. I think that's GST inclusive because you're giving them a service. I'm not sure. If you set a fee and that person has to pay that fee to do what you want them to do, you've sold them a service. But if you say donation, koha, different.
But if they're not registered for GST because they don't meet the threshold?
If you don't meet the threshold, you're sweet, it's all yours. Sometimes you have to get legal opinions. Sometimes Inland Revenue will not actually commit to something. Yeah, so I've seen a few groups have to do that because they do weird stuff. Honorariums, and last thing, honorariums and reimbursements for volunteers. If you, like I said before, if you're paying your volunteers something, you have to be careful you're not paying them a wage or a salary that's under the minimum wage. So you can reimburse volunteers for their actual costs. In fact, that's the only income you can give, payment you can give volunteers. But will tell me if I'm wrong. It has to be actual reimbursement for costs. You can give your volunteer board an honorarium, which is like a meeting fee to cover their costs of being there and maybe a little bit extra for their time and expertise, but that has to have tax applied to it. Yep, so it's got schedule of tax applied to it. Okay, so reimbursements, you don't have to worry about tax because you're giving an actual reimbursement, so it shows through your books as such. But if you pay an honorarium to someone or a koha to someone, that will actually attract tax. Is that okay? Right. If in doubt, ask. I'd like to say call up Inland Revenue, but if you call up Inland Revenue, you're going to be told that they're experiencing unprecedented demand. But you can email them and they will take 15 days to reply to you. Yeah.
What about income tax for contractors?
No.
Most of the work that not-for-profit organisations do is exempt from having to take out income tax for, except I think in the arts. I don't think that you have to. There's exemptions. There's a list on the Inland Revenue site that says which types of employees you have to do that for, and mostly it seems to be like jobs. Yeah. 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 So I was in a group that recently just hired a fundraiser, and we didn't have to take out any tax for her because she was on the exempt list. So go in and have a look to make sure your contractors that you're not supposed to be taking out scheduler payments for them. Yeah, good question, thank you. Pat.
One more question.
Can I ask one about treaty whiting and the tax that was there?
Right. The Treaty of Waitangi is only legally enforceable by government for government departments. So as community organisations, we are not legally bound by the treaty because we're not a government department. We didn't enter into partnership. But that's a legal kind of framework. Most not-for-profit organisations I work with honour the fact that it's a founding document And within their organisations, they set up frameworks and processes to honour the treaty. But unless you're a government department, you're not legally obligated to. You're just kind of morally obliged to. And if you get government funding, sometimes that funding will come with that obligation too. Yeah.
Just, I guess, a bit of a final comment on this is where people are sitting on boards where maybe they come from a commercial, small business or what have you background, and maybe thinking a not-for-profit is simple. My take on that is always it's just like running a small business
Yeah.
plus,
Yeah.
because you have greater compliance
Yeah.
requirements
Yeah.
over and above what a small business does.
Well, the complexity comes with the multiple stakeholders and the multiple owners. So in a business, it's easy. I'm only accountable to my shareholders and my owner. But in a not-for-profit, you're accountable to an entire community, funders, different stakeholders. That's the complexity. Yeah. This stuff is easy, eh? That's Inland Revenue's the stakeholder that cares. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome.
So I did circulate the form. Would like to know who's going to be here on the 20th of April, if you know already, or May, June, so we can plan a little bit. There's still a few slices of pizza left.
There was one date advertised that fell on a Sunday, so I take it as meant to be Monday.
Yeah, it was 10th of August, not 9. Yeah, cool. Okay, so people are paying attention. They're putting them in the agenda, obviously. So I always also announce other professional development we are providing. This Friday, first aid in Whangarei, fully booked, and then there's one for the people in Dargaville or the whole of Kaipara. We do one first aid in Dargaville, in Whangarei and Magatarauto, fully funded by Kaipara District Council. Wow! So that's April, May and early June. That's it. See you in April.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.